So I think if I take it across from there, is that you're known as a hybrid, right? And now I'm able to understand where that hybrid comes from, is that on the shop floor, you learn the creatives, you learn the human behavior, you learn the commercials, right? And you married all of them together. You went into every small little detail. And I think that's what has been the reason for your amazing success. You have gone to create organizations, you've changed organizations which have been languishing in the same position for years, and you've gone and turned them around, right? And if I have to basically ask you, in today's circumstances, where most of the people are, most of the CEOs who lead the organization, they're only driven by the numbers. You're probably one of those very rare ones who understands the product, who understands the creative. How important do you think it's important that the leadership understands this and has an understanding about the product, the human behavior, to be able to create that magic, which ultimately translates into sales, translates into business?
Yeah, I mean, of course, more than ever now, I mean, being 3 decades in the fashion industry, you see a lot. You see, 3 or 4 recessions, you see like the evolution of fashion, and you see these amazing companies, how they started in the history of fashion, and then obviously what today, fast forward, has broken them.
Yeah.
And, one of my greatest frustrations is the fact that I do see a lot of leadership that are purely financially driven. And when you only have finance, I was speaking to someone this morning, when you're only looking at profit, when you're hired as a CEO or a CFO that acts as a CEO, or a CEO that acts as a CFO, then that is a short-lived moment, because that means your one priority is numbers. And if we all understood the retail game, the biggest priority are the people. Right. Because retail and fashion are the most emotionally engaging businesses, right? Brand. And they are all people-centric. So the worst combination is if you have 100% finance driven, because right. That means there is zero empathy. And very little awareness of the people. And the people, I mean, is internal and external, right? Your teams and your customer. So when you discount that from the equation, your ultimate equation ends up in a really poor state, right? Because it might survive 1 or 2. And very little CEOs or CFOs realize that most time when you're making profit, it's because of the circumstance, not because of the business. Because it happened to be a great year for everyone. I mean, after 30 years, when I look at all the different P&Ls of all these different groups, everybody had an amazing year in 2016. Everybody had an incredible year in 2005. Everybody had an amazing year in 1988, because the environment was incredible. People were spending. Yeah. It's the true winners are the ones that are still doing incredibly well when recession hits. That's when you gauge it.
Yes.
And that is where you break it as well. So without having that knowledge or that understanding of the merchant side, the people side, the product side, the total experience, companies can't survive. What will happen is what we see today, where they get to a point where if they're thinking just one way, then the natural reaction is they start cutting costs dramatically. And it's fascinating to me, like every single one of them, their first call of duty is 2 things. One is to cut the marketing budget, which means immediately you disable your communication, which I've never understood. I've never understood this approach of when your times are hard, the first thing you do is slash a marketing. So immediately you're not communicating to your consumer. So that's gone. And then you start cutting costs. And then what? Cutting costs is not the answer, because if you're not looking at every other facet, which is your product, your customer, their voice, the experience, the quality, all of the partner relations, all of that. If you're not thinking, you're just thinking, you know, if I get rid of 50 people, I'm going to save this much. And then what about the other space? You might save, but what happens to your business? And that's why today we see businesses in this place that they're in.